Hi, welcome to my review of the original Black Christmas from 1974. So for the past few years, I've noticed over various Facebook pages for horror, forums, stuff like that, this film getting a lot of recommendations and people hailing it as being one of those hidden gems in horror from the 1970s. And for whatever reason, I've just never got around to seeing it. Well, finally coming into December, I needed some inspiration for a new review to film, and I decided to get around to watching Black Christmas, and I'm glad I did because I was really impressed by this movie. So this story is following this group of young women who are living in their sorority house over the Christmas break, and they start becoming stalked by this stranger. They have all these strange phone calls coming into the house, and they really start to worry when one of their friends from the group goes missing. So at the opening of the film, when we're being introduced to this group of women and they first start receiving these phone calls, this was something I would say is actually one of the really impressive aspects of the movie, was how chilling these phone calls really were. I was actually surprised by how grotesque and unnerving they were. Everything from the sound design, the effects of the call, how the stranger's voice sounds, and the things that he's saying, they really do get under your skin. It kind of surprised me slightly, going into an early 70s horror, you end up thinking they're going to be quite tame, especially by today's standards. When you think of shocking horror films from the 70s, you think of things like The Exorcist, but even by today's standards, it's a relatively tame movie. But the calls that were coming into the house here were actually quite shocking, and I think it really set everything on edge and set up the movie quite nicely and told us why we should be afraid and unsettled by this stranger. So we get these point of view shots then from the stranger's perspective and how they've managed to get into the house and sneak up into this attic. And I have to say, this was something that when I was young, always sent shivers down my spine. If you were in the house by yourself and you heard something, the idea of going up into a dark attic to have a look around really creeped me out. And just the way they film this here and the way they show those small moments of the attic opening and closing, they really find an interesting way to tap into those fears. Something else I really enjoyed in Black Christmas was how entertaining this group dynamic was between the women in this sorority house. And a lot of the dialogue I just found to be quite enjoyable to watch. There's a lot of funny moments. It's all quite natural, fast flowing chat, which feels realistic, between these young women getting drunk together and coming out with these wacky conversations. And I just found it all quite entertaining. Sometimes with older horror movies, you can occasionally get some of that plodding and a bit more dreary dialogue, and it doesn't move at quite the pace that I was always wanted to. Whereas here, even in the more down moments where it didn't feel like a horror, I was always quite entertained by the dynamic of the characters that was happening on screen. There was a number of lines that really caught me off guard and made me laugh, and they just had a good way to kind of keep me really engaged all of the way through this. I liked following along this group of characters. I really liked the main character Jess here, that was played by Olivia Hussey. She just had this real not taking any shit attitude and had a real competence about her. And even when everything starts getting really chaotic here and she's having to deal with all kinds of things being thrown at her, she's got this boyfriend who's trying to make her have a baby that she doesn't want. One of her friends has gone missing. She's receiving these horrific phone calls, and she's dealing with so much all at the same time. And I just really liked the way her character just kept so kind of calm and level-headed throughout these situations. I do think there's something quite unique about Olivia Hussey as well in the way she acts. She just comes across quite different from a lot of the other sort of scream queens we had from the 70s and the 80s. And it really worked for me. I really enjoyed going along with her on the story and liked her character a lot. And I think she was a really good actress to play this character of Jess. It was really cool as well seeing Saxon here playing this police detective looking into this case. Of course, he played basically the same role and character in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. except I did actually enjoy him a lot more here. He had a lot more charm about him and just seemed a bit less cold. He kind of had a bit more fun here, had a laugh with the characters, and I really quite liked that. I enjoyed following his character. This actually brings me to my next point as well, about how surprising it was to see how many elements of all of the slashers that we remember from the 70s and 80s, things like Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and how many elements of Black Christmas were used in those films. You know, a lot of the way it's filmed, the evil presence, the wide shots we got in Halloween, what feels like a complete rip-off of those POV shots we get of the killer, which were used in Friday the 13th, and then having the climax of the story with John Saxon as this police detective finally coming to the house with all of his men at the height of all the chaos, the same as Black Christmas in Nightmare on Elm Street, and just to see all of those similarities here. Yet Black Christmas came first. It did all of these things first, yet we never hear about it. I thought that was really quite interesting. So I hope this film over the years gets more recognition, as it feels like this is probably a lot of what inspired those later horror franchises that went on to be huge successes. One thing I found very chilling about Black Christmas was the ending, and how we never find out what the motivations and mindset of this killer ever was. And just having that final panning out shot where you see that this stranger has still not been caught, never been found out, and still lives up in the attic of this house. It was quite a dark note to leave it on, and really quite effective. My one negative with this though is I feel like the filmmakers probably had the idea for this creepy ending before they actually worked out a completely plausible way to interject that into the story. Like the conclusion we get here, where Jess's angered ex-boyfriend basically stumbles in at the wrong time, and they use that as a way to get the blame onto him, where they try and tell us that it must have been him all along. And the way they set that up felt a little bit contrived to me. It feels like they were just really trying to find a way for this killer to remain in the house at the end. And I understand why they did that, but I think when you really think about it, I couldn't fully buy into this plot line, especially when you consider you've had this entire police force go round to this house where a number of people have been killed there. You've got 2 people that are still missing, who are literally in the attic, and they never think to look up in the attic when there's a number of bodies at the scene missing and whatnot. I found that a little bit too difficult to buy into, so you do have to switch your brain off a little bit there. But even despite that, in terms of just the horror aspect, the scares of it, a very effective ending. I think as well, maybe the movie was just a little bit overly long in places too. They probably could have done with removing a few of the scenes, especially from the middle section. There's definitely some scenes here where if you'd removed them, it wouldn't have affected the plot lines. It wouldn't have taken away from the characters' story development. There were just some scenes that I didn't feel were needed here, which could make it feel like it was just dragging slightly at times. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this movie, and I'm glad I can recommend this one to you. I think in terms of quality, it really does stand up there with the original Halloween, the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And I'm sure this is a horror as well that a lot of people will not have seen before. They probably just might not have heard of it, or not have thought it was any good, just given that it doesn't have the reputation that a lot of these other big horror franchises do. But this is definitely one you need to add to your collection. I thought it was a really great horror film. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5 rating. Thank you very much for watching my review of Black Christmas. I'll leave a card up here for my review I did of John Carpenter's Halloween, if you want to know my thoughts on another horror classic from the 70s. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my video, and I'll see you next time.